every year a new iPhone is released, and also every year it's subject to some admiration and a great deal of criticism, and usually it's justified in either direction. But with that said, one of the more criticized features this year was the dynamic island on the iPhone 14 Pro. And look, hey, I get it. At first glance, it just looks like a cover-up for essentially the hole punch style display Apple has finally adopted like the rest of the industry. But after using it for a week, I've come to realize that the dynamic island is actually a pretty awesome feature, and it really does revitalize the way notifications and statuses can be viewed on iOS. And so I'm going to share some really cool experiences I've had with it, some of its best features, and what could be even better about it. And who knows, maybe by the end of this video, you might like me so much, you might want to sub to the channel and consider liking this video, but who knows. People who may not have yet used the dynamic island just keep thinking of it as a cover-up or almost like a mask for the hole punch display. And in principle, yes, that's what it is. However, it's not what it is that makes it so special, it's the way Apple executes the entire thing. Think of dynamic island as one consistent animation that keeps adapting and adjusting depending on what you're doing on iOS. It's really cool in that regard. Take, for example, the simple act of receiving a call. The pill shape at the top immediately expands into an interactable notification where you can either accept or reject the call. Once you accept it, the dynamic island immediately reformats itself to be a smaller form factor, and at that point you'll see basic information like the call duration as well as waveform to see audio activity. If at any point you need to bring the interactability back, simply holding down the dynamic island again expands it in a gentle fashion where you now have the option to hang up the call, for example. And if at any point you want the full functionality of the app, simply tapping on the island will elaborate and open the entire app that it corresponds to. Pretty cool, right? Another great one is getting AirDrop files. If, for example, you're receiving a large file via AirDrop, you'll immediately notice the dynamic island recognizes this and it actually expands slightly to give you an update that AirDrop is in progress, and you get a circular loading bar that lets you know how far along the file transfer is. The best part here is that it does not get in the way of you using the operating system, but also gives you enough information that you know that a file transfer is still in progress. And again, simply expanding the bar by holding it gives you more options like canceling the AirDrop. A similar kind of functionality can be achieved with something like screen recording, for example. So yes, you go to Control Center, you initiate the recording, but after that point, the dynamic island recognizes this and you'll see a red dot letting you know that screen recording is in progress. And not just that, again, elaborating upon the island shows you some quick options like stopping the recording when you're done with it. This again, it's not so much that you're getting some unique information here or unique functionality, it's just convenient, it's consistently in one place, and it's just that quick accessibility and intuition that makes it so nice. The same rule applies for applications that have visible background activities like, for example, voice memos. Again, you'll notice after initiating the recording, you immediately have the bar tell you the audio activity let you know that your voice is in fact being captured. And if you need to interact or stop the recording of your voice at any point, again, the island can be easily expanded and you can stop it straight from there. Now, another great example is music or media playback. So let's say you're on YouTube Music or Spotify, for example. Once you close the app, or rather once you move past the app, it gets immediately absorbed into the island itself, and here you can see some cool aesthetics like the album art as well as the audio waveform. But again, if you want the real deal, simply expanding the island again shapeshifts it into a more convenient form factor where you can either play, pause, or skip the track at your own convenience, and you always have access to go to the full app by tapping the island. Now, it's also worth noting, of course, that the island does have multitasking capabilities to an extent, or multi-status capabilities. For example, if you're listening to music and you have a timer on, you'll notice that it'll prioritize things accordingly, so the timer goes on the right side and the music goes on the left side, and now you can see a bit of both, and both are interactable, by the way, depending on which one you hold down. Now, it is worth noting you're kind of limited to only 2 statuses at a time, which is kind of a letdown in my opinion. So for example, if let's say you have music playing, you also have a timer, and you initiate screen recording, you actually get no indication that you've started screen recording. And not just that, you don't get to choose which apps are prioritized on the dynamic island. I really do hope Apple does give some more consideration to that, but we'll probably see some future revisions in the upcoming versions of iOS. Now, some apps take a purely aesthetic appeal to it. Take Apollo, for example. In their case, they've added this cool thing called Pixel Pulse. Basically, it's just an animation of an animal, in this case a cat, that kind of stays above the notch. There's nothing special going on here really, but it's a creative use of a space, or technically a lack of space, I guess, depending on how you look at it. But again, there's going to be many more applications like this, and iOS 16.1 will bring live notification support, so Dynamic Island can tell you stuff like where your Uber ride is, how far along it is, where your food order might be, and other cool information. So already we're seeing that there's going to be more third-party support for it, and I really do think Dynamic Island will eventually replace classic notifications on iOS as we know them. It's also worth noting that the indicator lights for when using the camera or the microphone are now actually projected in between the Face ID projector as well as the selfie camera. This is great because again, there's no wasted space over here. Every pixel is being used as best as it can in a very neat fashion. Now, with that said, I don't think Dynamic Island is a perfect implementation yet anyways. For example, when you get traditional push notifications like a text message or an email, it still oddly enough shows up right beneath the pill and actually looks uglier than before because it just seems like it's not supposed to be there. It's like a two-tiered notification system. I do think this will be resolved with future versions of iOS, but it definitely could have been a little bit better in that regard. And there's still a ton of other things that need to be added, like more third-party support and better use of the Dynamic Island in terms of what else can be done with it. But it's good to see that it's a pretty flexible feature. It's almost like its own living thing. It just does its own thing. When you're, for example, using Face ID, it'll let you know that, hey, you know, your face has been acknowledged, or whatever you want to think of that as. But there's a lot of cool stuff happening in there, and I really think the Dynamic Island has a ton of potential and a lot of quality of life aspects to it. Overall though, guys, I'd love to hear what you think of the Dynamic Island, whether or not you've used the feature itself, and if you think Apple's heading in the right direction here. As always, if you enjoy the content, make sure you hit that like button and sub to our channel. It genuinely helps us grow. Catch you in the next one.